Welcome to the Night Tube. I'm Stephen Knight, and I'm very grateful to have Chris Matheson return to the show. Chris, how are you?
I'm great. Stephen, how are you?
Wonderful. It is great to see you, and I'm very pleased that we're going to be talking about your new book, Conversations with a Father. I'm holding a copy of it now for those of you watching the video. Quite a personal book compared to many of your other books, but before we get into that and all the details, I have to first congratulate you on Bill and Ted Face the Music. How does it feel to finally have that out and people can stop asking you about it?
It feels great. It took a long time. It was a long time coming. We wrote it. We first got together with Alex and Keanu and sort of floated the idea of doing it in 2008. And it was 2020 when it came out. So it took a very, very long time, but it was quite satisfying to finally get it done, and get it into the world.
Well, I mean, talking of the world at that time, it was a very tricky time in terms of attending cinemas and things like that during the pandemic. Wasn't optimal timing for it, but it did exceedingly well on streaming services. I remember it being at number one on various streaming platforms for a while, so it seems like people responded to it really, really well.
Yeah, I think so. I think people basically liked the movie. Not everybody did, obviously, but I think the overall feeling was that it was Bill and Ted, which is how it felt to us when we wrote it, that it was like, right, these are still kind of the same guys to us. And the people who like Bill and Ted and enjoy Bill and Ted, I think sort of appreciated that it was 30 years later, but it still basically felt like a Bill and Ted movie.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's just great to see those characters again. And I think, and I'm going to sound very silly if I've got this wrong, because I've not done any research, but I'm fairly certain I saw your cameo as some sort of demon creature. Would I be correct there? You and Ed?
That is correct. We play the two demons in hell who Bill and Ted ask for directions from.
That's great. And you both have a line there, and I'm just wondering, for that couple of seconds on screen and that one line, how long were you in makeup exactly?
A day. It takes a long time to get into that. Well, maybe not a whole day. They probably started, it was the last thing that was filmed that day. There were other things earlier that day of Bill and Ted interacting with death in his house. They probably started putting us in makeup at maybe 4 or 5 p.m. and we probably shot at 10 or 11 p.m. It was pretty late when we shot it. Everybody was pretty wiped out. So
what do you do to occupy yourself? You sat there in a makeup chair getting demonized, for want of a better word. And how on earth do you occupy yourself?
You talk to the people who are doing it. Makeup people. Yeah, how about that? Makeup people and hair people on movies tend to be very gregarious because that's, they have people sitting in a chair for hours and hours and hours. And so they're often very lively people and kind of funny people and fun people to talk to. And the guy who did it was a guy named Bill Corso, who has a lot of other really, really big credits that I can't remember right at the moment, but he has a lot of really big, interesting movies that he's worked on. And so I think I probably just asked him about that, maybe like Terminator movies or something. I don't know, big ones. So wow. I was interested in what he'd done.
Lots of stories then, I take it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I suppose last question I'll ask you on Bill and Ted, just to satisfy my curiosity. I don't want to spoil anything, but a rather famous rock star turns up at one point. It's a very brief cameo. Bill and Ted, or future Bill and Ted, or a version of Bill and Ted from the multiverse, have sort of commandeered his house. How exactly did you get that superstar of the rock world to come along and shoot that scene?
I did not. This is the producers and the director. How they did it, I don't know. It's been 2 years, so I think I can pretty much say who it is. It's Dave Grohl, and Dave Grohl has demonstrated in the past kind of an interest in comedy. He's in he plays Satan, I think, in Tenacious D, Pick of Destiny, and he's got a pretty big chunk there at the end of that movie. He's a pretty funny guy, and I don't know. How it happened, I don't know. I'm just really glad it was him. His line deliveries are really, really funny. They're, what are you doing in my house? Who the hell are you two guys?
Yeah, nailed it for sure. All right, so moving on to your latest book, and I'm thinking, I mean, I don't know, I'm not a writer, but I'm guessing even when you're writing just straight up comedy fiction, I think it can be very personal in a sense, but maybe in a way that isn't obvious to your readers. However, this book is objectively personal. It's about your relationship with your late father. Before we talk about who your father was and his legacy, maybe you can tell us what made you think you would sort of pivot away from what you usually write to something a little bit more closer to home.
Well, during COVID, because there was so much time to just kind of fill days, I went down into my basement and I just sort of went through some old things that had been sitting on a shelf for a long time, just kind of wondering, like, can I do anything with this? Is there anything here? And I picked up this thing that I'd written about 20 years ago, which was called Conversations with the Father, which was kind of a satire of Conversations with God, the Neil Donald Walsh books. I don't know if you ever read any of those books. They're hilarious. They're really ludicrous. I read them all because I just thought they were really funny, because it's ostensibly the guy is talking to God, right? God is directly speaking to this guy and giving him all this supposedly great wisdom, which is all incredibly banal, and it's incredibly obvious that the guy's just talking to himself. And yet it was a huge sensation, at least in the US, maybe not in the UK, because you guys are maybe a bit smarter than us. It was a giant hit. And I thought it was ridiculous. So I wrote this kind of satirical version where this guy's clearly talking to himself and giving himself bad advice. And also I was kind of making fun of New Age thinking, because it's Conversations with God. It's a very New Age book. And my dad was a giant adherent of all things New Agey. But so I was kind of poking at him. I think I was poking at his belief system, but he was also him. He was a really good writer. So I showed it to him, probably with a dual motivation. I'm poking at you, Dad. I don't like your belief system, but you're a really great writer. Can you give me, what's your feedback? And I probably figured he'd get mad and tweaked because I was kind of, poking at him, but he didn't. He thought it was funny. He did say, when he first read it, he said, "Oh, are you making fun of me?" And I don't know. I probably said, no. I probably just, no, not really, Dad. This character is not you, which is true. The character is not him. Some of the beliefs are. But he gave me some really good feedback, and he made notes on it, and he gave me some ideas for jokes, and I thought that was really kind of beautiful, because I was directly making fun of his belief system, and he didn't really get offended. In fact, he kind of went along with it, and he thought it was really funny. Anyway, I just put it on a shelf for like 20 years because it's pretty. It wasn't big enough to be a whole book, it was pretty short. I pulled it out, I looked at it, I saw my dad's notes on it, and I thought, that's actually really interesting that he was able to do that. And that made me think that was an interesting part of the story to tell. Also, my relationship with my father, it's a big dramatic part of my life story. I had an incredibly close relationship with my father for the first 25 years of my life. I mean, I looked up to him in every way that a son can look up to a father. If my father had died when I was 25 years old, he just dies in a car crash or something, I'm going to think I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I'm going to think I got the greatest dad of all time. I mean, I adored him. I just thought he was wonderful. But our belief systems were different, and as I got older, that really, really started to matter, because he was a very, very strong believer in this kind of system of thought that centered around life after death. It was mainly life after death was the essential part. And he had to have that. I think he was really scared of death. I know he was really scared of death. And we just started as I got older, and I wasn't a boy anymore, let's say. I was more like a young man, and I was a rather opinionated and kind of deeply skeptical young man. And we just started getting into it and arguing. And what had been a really lovely relationship kind of turned south and got worse and worse until by the end we were really pretty much estranged. And that's sad, that's a sad thing that happened. And so there was a kind of a pain there. And so I needed to write about it for that reason too. So that's the genesis.
Well, that's a great answer, and that is something that your book is obviously laser focused on, this idea of disagreement between you and your father on the big questions. But maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. I suppose many people know who your father is, but for those who don't, maybe you could. I mean, you referred to your dad as a writer earlier, which is true, but he's a writer of some of the most iconic works of fiction that you could point to, genre fiction. Maybe you could just tell my viewers and listeners a little bit about who your father was and what he was responsible for.
My dad was Richard Matheson, and I guess after Ray Bradbury, he's probably the maybe Robert Heinlein. He's one of the most important science fiction and fantasy and horror writers of the 20th century. I think that's a consensus in that world. He wrote I Am Legend, which is now been turned into 3 different movies, none of which he really thought were any good.
So he was still around when the Will Smith.
He did. That came out in 2007, and my dad died in 2013.
Right.
He wrote The Shrinking Man, which is kind of a classic 50s science fiction movie in its own right. He wrote a lot of the great Twilight Zones, the Thing on the Wing with William Shatner in the airplane, and Agnes Moorehead in the farmhouse and the little flying saucers. He wrote Steven Spielberg's first movie, Duel. For those who like things more romantic, he wrote Somewhere in Time, starring Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. He wrote a big book called, it's not a big book, but it's an important book in his body of work called What Dreams May Come, which was turned into a movie with Robin Williams. A lot of really great stuff. He stripped a lot of the conventions out of horror. He stripped a lot of the gothic-y sort of dark hallways and candlelight and cobwebs and creaky floorboards. He took all that away. A lot of my dad's horror, if you read I Am Legend, you'll see this. It happens in broad daylight on a street in a part of Los Angeles, and it's great and it's riveting. And he just writes it realistically. What would it actually be like in his mind? But it's really pretty convincing. What would it be like to be the last man on Earth if everyone else has turned into a vampire? Which the logic of it, I don't quite know. Even as a kid, I was like, Dad, I don't know. What do they? If they're all vampires, how do they survive? Where do they get the blood to survive? I don't know. I didn't get it. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, it's one man in this very terrifying world, and he's haunted by the loss of his wife and the loss of his child, and it's great stuff.
For sure, yeah. I've not read that for a while. I may have to revisit it, to be honest. I'm sure it'll be adapted into one of the 5 films before we check out as well, because it is just a classic concept, isn't it? The last man kind of narrative. So I suppose, do you think possibly just as being a human, we all get to a point where we all, no matter what our relationship is with our father, we have unresolved issues when they've passed that we need to work through? Do you think that's just a part of the human condition in a way?
It probably is, Stephen. Yeah, it probably is.
So, was this a cathartic experience for you then, working through some of these things and getting them on paper?
Yeah, it was. It was actually in an interesting way. It was like spending time with my dad again, because I really opened myself up to all of it, the good and the bad, because I was trying on the page to convey how much I loved him and what a really wonderful relationship we had for a time. And then how kind of sad it was that it went bad. But I was spending a lot of time with him, because when you write a character that way, it's like you're feeling them, you're channeling them there, and it's it's my dad. I think that the best character any of us can write is ourselves, by far, because that's the one we know from the inside. That's going to be your best character. Or spin yourself out and do slightly alternate versions of yourself. Those are going to be your best characters. Your next best characters are going to be your parents, because you know them, because you grow. I mean, assuming you grew up with them, but you not only do you feel them almost like genetically, but they are your environment. They are your world. You hear them. You take in everything they are. And most kids observe their parents pretty closely, I think. So yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed spending time with my dad, and that again.
That's really interesting. I suppose what interests me as well, I suppose it's not unusual for somebody to write about their relationship with their parent or a father. But I mean, he was two people really. He was your father, and he was also a public figure, someone who's responsible for so much, iconic work. He also has a public perception. He also, I assume, still has a lot of fans interested in his legacy, his writing, his work. I just wondering, were you worried at all about writing about him after he'd gone, and maybe in some people's eyes tainting that legacy with your revelations about his new age beliefs and things like that?
It's a good question. It did cross my mind, actually. I think in the end, people will decide on their own what to make of Richard Matheson. I don't think it lessens him as a writer. It does nothing to detract from his writing, in my view. But I was aware that if I went into the world of Richard Matheson fans, I think there would be, that there would probably be some negative response, like why are you saying these things about this guy? I'm still not sure, to be honest. It certainly did occur to me. Yeah.
So, I mean, what is it like then? I mean, times have changed, really. I suppose it'd be very different now. But having a father who is also this public figure, I mean, you mentioned in the book about being outside with him. I think it was in one of these new age bookshops, actually, and people recognizing him and coming up to him. Is that a strange thing when you're younger? Is it something you get used to? I suppose maybe you don't have anything else to compare it to.
Yeah, it was just reality. It didn't happen all that often, because he's a writer, and writers he wasn't an actor. He wasn't a movie star or TV star. He was a writer. And so only a limited number of people really knew what he looked like and who he was. But when it did happen, it was strange. I definitely noticed it. And I thought that that those few people who did come up to him and talk to him were strange and unsettling. and as he did as well, he would just sort of roll his eyes and say, well, you don't get to pick your fans, really.
That's interesting. So, I mean, one of the things that pops up in your book about this as well is, I think, psychics are mentioned at one point, and I remember that's kind of like a triggering thing for me. I'm very critical of religion, but in many ways, I don't blame people for being religious. I kind of understand it in a way. Indoctrination can be part of that culture. Some people just want to, it makes them think they're a better person, and it does make them a better person sometimes, and I'm fine with that once you take the zealots and the fundamentalists out of the mix. But with people claiming to be psychic, it is 100% clear to me that they're bastards, and they know they are. And I was just wondering how you feel about that kind of thing, people pretending to be able to speak to spirits or telling you the future, because once you're tuned into the techniques they use, you can spot them a mile away, and there's no ambiguity about whether it's intentional or not.
Yeah, it's complete snake oil. It's they're charlatans. Do some of them get so deeply immersed in it that they believe their own story. Perhaps. I mean, yeah. I mean, there are charlatans who tell their own story so many times that they kind of they drink their own Kool-Aid in a way, and it's like it's actually the truth. I think most of them, there's a cynical aspect to it, and it's a quick and easy way to prey on humans' fears and insecurities and anxieties and desperate desire to know something about the future, understand something about what's going to happen to them, and be comforted about death specifically. I didn't like, even when I was young, before I'd kind of grown up and come to realize how strongly I disliked that stuff, what colossal bullshit I thought it was. Even when I was a teenager and my dad would take me to see his astrologer, who was also, a psychic, because of course she was, right? I thought it was just nonsense, I just remember being in her weird little house and too many cats, and it smelled like cigarettes, and she's this wizened little person who claims to know all these things, and I just thought it was ridiculous. Like, what, Dad? Why do you believe this? Why do you believe this? But that's the big question, right?
Yeah, sure. I think as well, my partner, she knows I have a very special dislike for psychics, and we were staying in a hotel a while back, and there was a group of strangers who we'd kind of met, and one of the women in the group announced that she had psychic abilities, and I thought that was a good time for me to go to the bar and get out the way for 5 minutes. And when I was at the bar, unbeknownst to me, my partner thought it'd be funny to feed this so-called psychic really specific details about the name of my childhood toy, the name of my parents. So when I came back and this woman offered to give me a reading, it blew my world for a good 3 minutes before I realised what was going on. But it was touch and go there for a moment. My partner has a very warped sense of humour, unfortunately.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah.
As you say, once you get their game is rather obvious. What they do is they ask leading questions, and what they do is they listen carefully, and then they say certain things that are kind of going to be true of most people at any time in their entire life, but these sort of broad statements that people are going to nod and go, "Oh my God, yeah, that's me." What I've heard from, because it's a big thing in my family. It's not just my dad. It's my siblings as well who believe this stuff. And what I've heard on a number of occasions, the way they describe it is that this person knew things they couldn't possibly know. That's the big sell. They knew things they couldn't possibly know. And I always think, you told them.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, you told them. That's how they knew. Or they said something rather broad and general that is not really all that meaningful, and you're imbuing it with all kinds of importance that it doesn't have.
Well, one of the things I really appreciate about comedy as well, I think often it can really shine a light on the human condition, and you speak you make some great points in the book about how you would laugh at things when you were scared. There was this idea of using comedy to sort of, get over your fears of things. And I was just wondering, is comedy, do you think, a coping mechanism in many ways? I mean, you're the comedy writer, you've got the comedic mind. What is it about the world that makes you think, rather than address it with a serious head, you're going to poke at it in a comedic way? What utility does that serve? I'm always fascinated by it.
Well, I was a very anxious kid, and I'm probably an anxious man now. I've had just a lot of anxiety in my life, and I guess anxiety may just be kind of a euphemism for fear when you get down to it, really. I mean, fear's the root of it. And so the question was like, well, what to do? Not a conscious question, not like I'm 6 years old and I'm going, what do I do with all this fear I feel? Because I wasn't that kid. That's a strange kid. And I was a different kind of strange kid, not that kind of strange kid. But I think that it was hard, it's a very fear-based family, and a lot of nervousness, a lot of worrying, a lot of uncertainty. And at some point, and I wish I could remember the exact moment that it was, but I don't, because I imagine it was pretty early. Something that had seemed scary, maybe, revealed itself, or I found a way to look at it, or it probably revealed itself as funny. And I laughed. And I think that was an important moment in my life, because I think that laughter, it dissipates the fear quite rapidly and noticeably. And I liked that. And then I think that became a kind of a weird sort of mission for me. Like, I just want to laugh at things. When I laugh at things, I don't feel so scared. When I can find a way that I can laugh at them, I can be less frightened. And it can be done, because it's all just how you look at things, right? It's all, life is how you look at it. Life is a matter of perspective. And yes, it's very scary in a lot of ways. And it's for obvious reasons. I mean, we're all going to die. We know that, right? Like, we're the creature that knows we're going to die. Don't
just drop that on me. What?
Shit.
Jesus Christ.
No. I was talking in a purely theoretical way. That's not actually true. Don't take that too seriously. That's a hard one, Yeah. Like, that's a really heavy thing. And not only us, but everybody we know. And life is filled with pain and loss. But then you look at it from it, you shift your point of view. And there's also something kind of absurd about life. There's something ridiculous and there's a kind of a silliness, and if you can play with it and find that part of it, then it's much more manageable and it feels a lot better. And I think that was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to see funny things as much as I could. I was drawn to funny things. I loved them. And then as I got older, I wanted to try to make funny things if I could, because I wanted that to be my reality. And as it is to this day, it's what I enjoy doing creatively. I mean, actually, you said the part about my dad it's different. It is different. It's not actually like anything I've ever written before, because it's pretty serious. It's not actually funny. I don't think it didn't strike me, maybe a little bit here and there, but not really. The other half is comedic, but the part that pertains to my dad is not. It's pretty serious, and it was really a different experience to write it. It came from a different place, but the comedy making can be just a really wonderful experience when I can tap into it, because I don't know, can one be scared and laughing at the same time? I mean, there's nervous laughter in horror films. They do that all the time, but that's more like they give you a release, right? They or at least this is my understanding. I don't like scary movies, so I'm not any expert on them, but I think they give you these moments of release, right? Where you get to kind of like almost kind of get some of the tension out. But can you be simultaneously scared and laughing? I mean, I guess, like nervous laughter, but that doesn't really count. That's almost like you're, to me, that's a different kind of laughter. But like really laughing and scared, I don't think I can personally. And so, yeah, I like that very much. If I can access the part of life, the version of life that I can understand, that sort of is about play and silliness and absurdity and laughter, that's good. I like to live there as much as I can.
Yeah, you do the comedy very well. That's obviously a stupid thing to say to a comedy screenwriter, but it is true. But I mean, I think certainly with you saying there's the serious aspects in your writing about your conversations with your father. I think one informs the other in a way. I've got this weird theory that having a comedic point of view, maybe as you referenced point of view before, and being able to look at things and put the comedy into it or understand it through a comedic lens, I think it requires you to have an understanding of what makes humans tick. I think if you look sometimes at some of our comedic actors, when they get the chance to sort of display their dramatic chops in movies. I mean, look at things like Jim Carrey, Robin Williams, when they've got a serious dramatic role, they seem to excel in a way that maybe a non-comedian wouldn't. And I'm just wondering, is there something there? I suppose I'm very closely getting to the sad clown theory of comedy, aren't I, in a way?
Well, maybe it's like playing piano or something, right? And it's like, how many notes can you? And again, I'm just again talking about something I know nothing about. I don't know how to play the piano, and I know nothing about playing the piano. But I think, do you know anything about playing the piano?
No.
Okay, so it's going to be two people who know nothing. But
I can play chopsticks. Does that count?
Okay, yes, that does count. That in my book, that makes you an expert because you know that much more than me. I think that maybe range matters. I think for a singer, I think range matters. You know, like Tom York, the Radiohead singer. He's got this beautiful, beautiful range. You know, and maybe the people who can play comedy, it's not always the case that dramatic actors are good at comedy. I don't think.
No.
Is a good dramatic actor like Daniel Day-Lewis? He is good at comedy. Actually, he's really good at comedy. Are all good dramatic actors good at comedy? I'm not. I
was trying to make the argument that it's more the other way around. I think it's easier for a comedian to tap into the drama. I think sometimes when dramatic actors do comedy, it's funny because they're a dramatic actor. Do it in a comedy situation, it's kind of like a novelty. But I think there are some actors who are primarily known for their comedic abilities that excel when they're in a straight drama role.
Well, I mean, you're right. Jim Carrey in they're getting rid of the
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. That's a shit movie title, isn't it? That's terrible.
It's hard to remember.
Yeah.
And Adam Sandler has been really good in a couple of dramatic.
Ben Stiller,
roles.
I think, as well as
Ben Stiller has been good too. So yeah, I think you're onto something with that.
Maybe. Okay, so circling back around to your father's New Age beliefs, so maybe you could explain a little bit about what you would class as a New Age belief. I mean, it doesn't necessarily fall within the typical monotheisms, but it's kind of like a faith-based belief about the afterlife, mysticism, things like that. What is a New Age belief in your opinion, and what is it about them that really irks you so much?
Well, I'm not a fan of organized religion,
No.
Obviously, but there was an awareness anyway when you're dealing with Judaism or Christianity or Islam or Buddhism that like these are old and there is some weight to this, and there are some beautiful things mixed into these books, all of them. There are beautiful things in the Old Testament. There are beautiful things in the New Testament. There are some beautiful things in the Quran. I mean, and not to mention all the beautiful art that's emerged and the beautiful music and the beautiful architecture. These are really important building blocks of human existence, I think. Although I think the basic ideas of them are kind of bullshit, New Age stuff kind of, and I think I'm revealing I'm really not much of an expert on anything here, Stephen, because everything we talk about, I'm really not an expert at all. I think it kind of begins in the early 20th century, and it starts with like these theosophists who are inspired by these kind of mystical ideas, and they're not members of any organized religion. They're more about they're into hypnosis, and they're into seances, and they're dealing with the same fundamental thing, which I think is fear of death. I think that's what informs most of human life, actually, on some deep subterranean level. It's just a freak out, it's just really weird. And people are always trying different ways to get their head around that. And so they're stripping away like Jesus and God and the theistic parts of it. But they're focusing more on the kind of mystical, magical aspects of it, ghosts and the spirit world, and being able to access the spirit world. And then I think it sort of broadens out, and at least my dad's version of it, it's everything. Do you know what I mean? It's pyramid power, it's Bigfoot, it's aliens, it's ESP, it's, I mean, you know, every kind of what I would call sort of crackpot, weird theory. Yeah, my dad believes. And the book that he turned to for the great source of wisdom was this laughable book called Thinking and Destiny by a guy named Harold Percival that he wrote in, I don't know, maybe 1915, 1920, something like that. And it's, you know, it's a gassy, overblown, ridiculous book that my dad believed in completely and was constantly quoting. So I don't know whether I've even laid a finger on what New Age thinking actually is, but it's I would say from my standpoint, like you were talking about with psychic phenomena, that's very New Age thinking. It's fraudulent. You know, it's fraudulent. It's empty. It has and it doesn't have any of the sort of, for lack of a better word, and again, I'm an atheist and a pretty serious atheist. It has none of the majesty or grandeur of those big religions, which do contain some of that stuff. It's just tinny and it's cheap and it's kind of crummy and it's really, really pretentious because it's affecting this kind of like, we're beyond these religions, we're bigger than that. But it has a lot of the same stupidity and ugliness and mean-spiritedness, and that's what I got.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose as I've got a bit older, I've started to see this idea, I suppose, or this feeling that we're all looking for a bit of meaning. And I suppose religion or New Age beliefs are a way to get a foothold on some sort of meaning. It's quite accessible, quite easy to get to. And I suppose, I mean, do just the quote-unquote spiritual people or religious people have an advantage over us sort of baby-eating atheist heathens, in the sense that we really have to focus and think about how we derive meaning, all the while knowing, as you so lovely pointed out earlier in the show, that oblivion is pending and everything we know and love will die one day. I mean, is that a big problem? Should we just convert to a religion now to sort of jettison that worry?
Well, I'm not sure what do they have an advantage? Does it make them feel better?
Yeah.
Does it actually increase their quality of life? Does it, in fact, make them feel better? And I think from my experience with my dad, the answer would be no. I don't think it did. I think it made him feel a little safer. But it was like he locked himself away. What makes human life interesting and exciting is we're here for a limited amount of time. And we know that, right? Like that's kind of built into our view of things. We know that. We have this window of time, and it's short because we know that too. It'll be over before you know it. But we can do things with it. And one of the big things we can do with it is we can look around and ask questions. And there are no questions that we're precluded from asking. Whereas when you have that belief system, you're kind of just shutting a lot of stuff down. You really don't ask those questions because, don't look too close at this thing because it's not going to hold up. It's not a very strong support system. And it really bothered my dad that I didn't believe what he believed. And that to me gets at something, as it often bothers religious people. Like we bother them, like atheists bother them more than you'd think we should. Because I think what it gets at is it just gets in there. They know on some level that it's made up. They do know that. Every religious person I've ever known, I've bumped into that. They do know. And so us saying it's made up, that's bad, that's really, really like we're throwing water on the bucket of water on the witch at the end of the Wizard of Oz or something. This is going to melt them or something. People like us, we're just living our lives and are free to look at the world however we're going to look at it. and don't have to sort of back into certain things or avoid certain things because, that's wrong. You shouldn't think that. I mean, really, it's built into organized religion. Don't ask questions. Don't ask questions. Questions are bad. Doubt is bad. And I think that goes into New Age. It's like that. Oh, it absolutely goes into the New Age stuff, because my dad would say, well, the reason you can't, the reason psychics will not do their thing in front of a skeptic is because the skeptic ruins it, because they can't, so it can't happen. The skeptic is eliminating or they're destroying the environment that's necessary, because it's such a delicate, little web of magical stuff that's happening. And I just think that's just a hell of a place to live. I wouldn't want to live my life there. No, I don't think they have any advantage at all. I wouldn't do it in a million years. I wouldn't do it for $1 million. I wouldn't do it for $10 million. I'm happy to try to see things as best I can, knowing that what can I see? Really, I'm just me. It's not like I see that much, but I don't have to, steer my eyes away from things. I don't have to, put blinders on. I just look at things to the best of my abilities. And that's, I think, priceless.
That's a very good answer.
And for comedy, come on, man. Why is there no good religious comedy? Why? That's why. Because they can't go anywhere, because they're so constricted. They're so repressed. They're so limited in what they can say. Plus the fact that just like comedy's kind of bad, I mean, if you're Martin Luther or John Calvin or, St. Augustine, is just like, comedy's bad, it's
not
like
particularly funny dudes.
Not particularly. Well, they are in a way, if you look at them the right way, but not deliberately. So yeah, they're ridiculous. They're ridiculous dudes, in my view. No sense of humor at all. And so if you want to play with life and you want to find the absurdity in life, because if you're a believer, life's not absurd. Not at all. There's no absurdity to any of this. That's not right. That's disrespectful, right? No, of course it's not absurd. Now, you may not understand, but God or somebody has a perfect, beautiful plan, and you're just revealing your ignorance when you say that you perceive absurdity in it. Well, they don't have as much fun. They don't have as many laughs.
Yeah, I mean, I found it interesting what you said about, this idea that they when they're faced with an atheist, this sort of reflection being put up to them, they kind of, they kind of realize it's bullshit. And I think that's often exemplified with the way people will respond to atheists by dismissing them as another religion. So it's almost saying I'm religious rather, and so are you. So you're just as stupid as me, kind of thing, which isn't the greatest argument, I suppose. I'm just wondering as well, is there a sense, do you think, that you have perhaps that maybe these, new age beliefs and ideologies stole your father away from you? Because you speak being, young with your father, having a great time, fun together, this incredible rapport, going to Dodgers games, things like that. And obviously the conflict started when you got a bit older and you could stand on your own 2 feet, have your own ideas and opinions, and they obviously came into conflict with what your dad believed. Do you feel resentful towards New Age beliefs for that reason? Do you feel they stole your dad away?
I think I do feel that in a way. My dad he had greatness to him. He did. He had this beautiful, creative mind. He was really quite open-minded in many ways, politically, socially. He loved comedy. He loved to play. He had a real capacity for silliness. He had a great sense of humor. There was largeness to him. But I think he was so scared. He was so scared of dying. And he was scared of living too, because as I also talk about in the book, he was scared of sex, terrified of sex. And if you're scared of death and you're scared of sex, You're kind of scared of like everything, right? I mean, you're scared of life. You're scared of life. He's scared of men. He's scared of women. He's scared of dying. He's scared. And I think I think what you're saying, I agree with it. It's these ideas, they prey on fear, they prey on weakness, and they infiltrate people's souls, and they shrink them. You know, my dad's greatest book is The Shrinking Man, which he wrote when he was 30 years old, and somehow he knew. Weirdly, it's very prescient, that book. He knew what was going to happen to him. These ideas, they shrank him. And it was slow because he wrote it in 56 and I was born in 1959, you know, so, and I thought he was great until, I don't know, the early 80s or something. So, you know, it was a slow process, but gradually, and maybe as he got older and moved closer to death, I don't know, they turned him into something different than he'd been before, where the belief system, my belief system, you know, he just talked about it a lot, and it triggered me every time. And I do feel that, Stephen, I do.
You have this amazing line in the book that I laughed out loud when I read it, and you were just talking about how if your dad was right and you ended up in the afterlife, you would end up arguing about the afterlife in the afterlife, which I thought was a lovely sentiment. And it does touch on the idea of the complicated nature of father and son, especially when you're a feisty, young, opinionated man. And I was just wondering if, when you look back at them discussions now and you're finding your feet in the world, your dad's got these staunch beliefs, the person you were when you had these conversations is not the person you are as a much older adult. Would you think if you, could have gone back and had them discussions differently, would you have changed them? Would you have been a little more less willing to get into it for the sake of peace, or do you not kind of regret the way this happened?
That's a very good question. I'm of two minds. There's the one part of me that says, yeah, if I could go back, I'd just go around it. You know, I would just go around it, because what was accomplished? You know, did I change his mind? Not in the least. Did he change my mind? Not in the least. So we just basically burned our relationship to the ground, and for what? There's another part of me that thinks he was going to say who he was, and he was going to talk about his view of things, and I was going to respond. I wasn't going to bite my tongue. I had my own ideas about things, and would I know how to do it maybe better now? Maybe. I'm 63 years old, you know, and most of these conversations happened when I was in my, let's say my late 20s to 50 or something like that. Presumably I'd do it better now, but that's not actually obvious. I don't know. You know, by the time it's as I said before, if my dad had died when I was 25, I would have just thought I was the luckiest guy in the world. Like, geez, what a dad I got. And then he's dying, right? Whatever amount of years later that is, 30 years later, he's dying. And we're just staring at each other. He's on his deathbed, and we're just kind of staring at each other. It's kind of this weird standoff. That's strange. That's a strange journey. Now, if I could go back to that moment in the hospital room, I certainly would do that differently. I certainly would just take his hand and kiss him on the cheek and say, try to make it all better. I didn't. He didn't. We just kind of stared at each other. It was a very strange ending. I do regret it. I don't know if it was inevitable. I'm not sure. I'm still not sure. I don't know if I'll ever know that. I do think, the irony is, if my dad was right, and I in no way think he's right, I don't believe any of that stuff. If he's right, I think we'd be very happy to see each other again. on the other side. I'd be very happy to see him. I think we'd hug, and I think we'd kiss, and I think we'd say, "Oh, it was a kind of misunderstanding," and I think it would be grand. I think we'd have a really lovely sort of visit with each other if it lasted for an hour. Then if it kept going, then I don't know. I don't know if I could go back and do it again. Would I do it differently? I'm not sure.
It's always complicated with family, isn't it? And I suppose when you're younger as well, there's this sense you have of adults of they've got the answers, they've figured everything out, they're in control, they can handle things better. And as you become an adult yourself, you realise it's bullshit. We're all vastly incompetent. We have no real idea what we're doing, and we're trying to just manage as best we can as we go along. And I don't know, I mean, that's how I feel. I'm 38 now, sure. And I can't, I seem to be waiting for this magical moment when adulthood happens and I'm fully in control. And I think that's a necessary thing for a child to have, to look up to adults, but it's a complete fiction, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think that's how it goes. I think, if you're lucky, you gain something in experience and perspective and maybe even wisdom in this life if you're lucky. I don't think that's inevitable. I think that it sometimes happens. I've seen it happen in other people. I think it's something to aspire to. It didn't happen in my dad. It didn't. Will it happen in me? Probably not.
Well, looking at something that's more familiar in terms of your body of writing is the second half of this book, and it's very meta. From the wonderful mind of Gordon Whitehead. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about what that is and how much has that changed since when you first started writing it.
Gordon Whitehead is the author of the second part of the book, and he's this sort of failed writer, I guess, whose marriage is breaking up and whose son really doesn't want to have much of a relationship with him, and he's been kind of booted by his wife, and so he's living in like a little apartment, and he's working on this ridiculously lame science fiction book which he's stuck trying to figure out a plot point, and suddenly the keys on his keyboard start just moving, and he claims that he's being sort of possessed. He's not doing it. He's not doing it. He's not doing this typing, that it's just happening from the outside. And it's very quickly revealed that it's God. It's God, the creator of the universe, who is coming to talk to Gordon and kind of put him on the right path. And so they have a series of conversations where God gives Gordon life advice and tells him the meaning of life, and then it evolves into the point where Gordon asks God to work on his science fiction book with him, and God collaborates with them, and then they get in arguments about that and have a falling out, and then come back together to write the climax of the book. That's kind of the premise of that half of Conversations with the Father.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny. I mean, it's all there as well, the vanity of God and the new age emphasis on acronyms, deepities, things like that. It's very funny. I mean, it'd be very cheap to make as a movie, I would imagine, but perhaps maybe not so much the alien stuff, but there's an idea there.